The small apartment was cloaked in the comforting stillness of midnight. The muffled hum of distant traffic served as the only reminder of the bustling city beyond its thin walls. Eric Kane, a 32-year-old freelance journalist with perpetually messy brown hair and a 5 o'clock shadow that overstayed its welcome, closed the door behind him with a weary sigh. Dropping his bag onto the couch, he moved toward the kitchen, each step creaking against the worn wooden floor. The dull glow of his desk lamp cast long shadows over his cramped living space cluttered with piles of books, coffee-stained notepads, and the lingering smell of takeout boxes. He poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, staring into the muted glow of the microwave clock, 12:37 a.m. The day had been uneventful. His latest article, a lukewarm piece about local infrastructure, had drained his energy and his creativity. Eric ran a hand through his disheveled hair, contemplating sleep. But as he moved toward his bed, a strange sound stopped him cold. It wasn't loud, but distinct, a faint rustling, almost like fabric brushing against the floor. He froze, ears straining. His first thought was mice. The building was old, and he'd had his share of uninvited guests. But this sound was different, deliberate, controlled. His pulse quickened. Eric scanned the room, his sharp blue eyes darting to every corner. But nothing seemed out of place. The shadows under his bed, however, seemed darker than usual, a black void that swallowed the light. Steeling himself, he crouched down and lifted the edge of the blanket. For a moment there was only darkness, and then two eyes glowing with a faint iridescent shimmer stared back at him. "Don't scream," a voice whispered. It was soft, melodic, and undeniably not human. Eric's instincts screamed for him to run, but his body refused to move. His breath hitched as the figure emerged from the shadows. First, long, slender fingers with a faint lavender hue gripped the edge of the bed frame. Then, a tall, lithe figure unfolded itself into the room. Her movements were impossibly fluid, as though gravity bent itself to accommodate her grace. She stood before him, her head tilted slightly to the side, studying him with those glowing eyes. Her skin was smooth and faintly translucent, a soft lavender that deepened along the curves of her face and limbs. Her hair cascaded like liquid silver, shimmering with faint hues of blue and violet as it caught the light. She was clad in a sleek, iridescent suit that hugged her form, its material pulsating faintly as though alive. Eric stumbled backward, his back colliding with the edge of his desk. "What the hell?" he started, but his voice faltered. What are you?" The figure stepped closer, her movements silent and deliberate. "I am Liara," she said, her voice calm but tinged with something that sounded like uncertainty. Eric's breathing was shallow, his mind racing to comprehend what he was seeing. "Liara?" he echoed. "What are you doing under my bed?" Liara clasped her hands in front of her, her long fingers interlocking. "I required a safe place to observe." "Observe what?" His voice cracked, equal parts confusion and fear. She hesitated, her luminous eyes searching his face. "Human interactions, specifically mating rituals." The air seemed to leave the room, and Eric's stomach lurched. "Mating what?" He blinked rapidly, half convinced he was hallucinating. "You're here to study mating." Liara nodded, her expression serene. "It is a fundamental aspect of your species' behavior. Understanding it is vital." Eric rubbed his temples, his mind struggling to keep up. "You can't just," he gestured wildly at her, "then the bed. Hide under someone's bed and expect them to what? Participate?" She tilted her head again, her curiosity evident. "I have been observing you for some time, Eric Kane. You were selected for your compatibility." "Compatibility?" His voice rose an octave. "You've been watching me." Liara's gaze didn't waver. "Observing," she corrected gently. "It is necessary for my research. You exhibit qualities that make you an ideal subject." Eric's hands trembled as he leaned against the desk for support. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. "This is insane," he muttered. "I'm dreaming. I fell asleep on the couch, and this is just—" "You're not dreaming," Liara interrupted, her tone firm but not unkind. "I mean you no harm. My presence here is purely for study." Eric's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Study? Lady, you're in my apartment talking about mating rituals like it's a biology class. You don't think that's—" "I don't know," invasive. Her expression shifted, a flicker of what might have been guilt crossing her face. "I apologize if my methods have caused distress. It was not my intention, not your intention." Eric echoed, his voice rising. "What did you think was going to happen?" "I just would volunteer." Liara stepped closer, and Eric instinctively pressed himself against the desk. Despite his fear, he couldn't ignore the strange magnetism she exuded. Her presence was otherworldly, yes, but there was something almost calming about her voice, the way her gaze softened. "You are afraid," she said softly, almost to herself. "I expected this." "Of course I'm afraid." Eric snapped, his voice cracking. "You're an alien. You're standing in my room talking about mating." What am I supposed to feel? Liara regarded him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she took a step back, her movements as fluid as before. You are right, she said. I have intruded upon your space without consent. I will leave if that is what you wish. Her words caught him off guard. He had expected resistance, maybe even aggression, but not this. Wait, he said before he could stop himself. You can't just leave. I have questions. A lot of questions. Liara paused, her gaze meeting his once more. Then ask, she said simply. Eric swallowed hard, his fear giving way to a strange mix of curiosity and disbelief. What are you? Where did you come from? Why me? Liara's luminous eyes softened. I am a xenobiologist from a distant system. My purpose is to study the intricate behaviors of sentient species across the galaxy. Your species is unique. Your emotional and physical connections are unlike anything I have encountered. Eric shook his head, still struggling to process her words. And you thought hiding under my bed was the best way to learn about that. It was a calculated decision, she admitted, her tone almost apologetic. I chose you because you are unattached, isolated. You observe the world but keep yourself at a distance. It made you compatible. Compatible, he repeated, the word tasting strange on his tongue. Compatible for what exactly? Her gaze didn't falter. For understanding. For connection. The weight of her words hung in the air, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Eric's mind raced, his instincts at war with his growing curiosity. The fear hadn't left him, but something else had taken root and need to understand this strange, otherworldly being who had upended his reality. Okay, he said finally, his voice steadier than he felt. Let's start from the beginning. Liara nodded, a faint smile curving her lips. As you wish, Eric Kane. And just like that, the world he thought he knew was forever changed. Eric sat on the edge of his bed, his hands gripping his knees tightly as Liara stood before him. The alien woman moved with an unnerving grace, her every gesture deliberate, calculated. Despite the surreal circumstances, there was a strange air of calm about her, as though this situation were entirely normal. For Eric, however, it was anything but. His mind churned with questions, each one jostling for prominence. But above all, one thought kept rising to the surface. How did it come to this? So let me get this straight, Eric said, his voice tinged with nervous energy. You're here to study human mating rituals. Liara nodded, her iridescent eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. Correct. And you chose me because I'm what? Unattached. Compatible. You display traits that align with the parameters of my study, she replied calmly. Your solitary nature allows for undisturbed observation. Your curiosity is promising. Promising, Eric echoed, shaking his head, right? Because that makes this whole thing less weird. Liara took a step closer, and Eric instinctively leaned back, his pulse quickening. Despite her alien appearance, there was something undeniably disarming about her presence. Her voice, soft yet firm, carried a soothing cadence that seemed to burrow into his thoughts. You are overwhelmed, she observed, tilting her head slightly. This reaction is expected. Expected? Eric scoffed, his laugh sharp and uneasy. Lady, you're an alien who just crawled out from under my bed to talk about mating rituals. I think I'm allowed to be overwhelmed. Liara's expression remained serene, though there was a flicker of something in her gaze, sympathy, perhaps. Your fear is natural. I do not wish to harm you, Eric Kane. Yeah, you keep saying that, he muttered, running a hand through his hair. But forgive me if I'm not exactly reassured. Liara paused, her luminous eyes scanning his face. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she extended her hand toward him, palm up. The gesture was universal, a silent offering, a truce. Eric stared at her hand, his heart thudding in his chest. Her skin shimmered faintly in the dim light, the lavender hue shifting like liquid under a glass surface. It was both beautiful and unsettling. What are you doing? He asked, his voice low. Offering reassurance, she replied simply. Touch is a significant aspect of human interaction, is it not? He hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to retreat. But curiosity, a force as powerful as fear, urged him forward. Slowly, hesitantly, he reached out and placed his hand on hers. The sensation was unlike anything he'd ever felt. Her skin was cool to the touch, smooth and pliant, yet there was an underlying firmness that defied comparison. A faint hum vibrated through her palm, sending a shiver up his arm. It wasn't unpleasant, if anything. It was oddly soothing, but it was undeniably alien. There, Liara said softly, her gaze never leaving his. Does that ease your fear? Eric swallowed hard, his throat dry. I don't know. It's a start, I guess. Liara withdrew her hand, her movements as fluid as water. Your species relies heavily on physical and emotional connection. It is what makes you unique. Unique, Eric repeated, his voice tinged with skepticism. I'm pretty sure most of us would call it messy. Perhaps, she conceded. But it is also beautiful. Complex. It is why I am here. Eric frowned, leaning forward slightly. What do you mean? Why are you studying us? Liara's expression grew thoughtful, her gaze distant. My people have observed your kind for centuries. From afar, at first analyzing your technology, your societies. But we lacked understanding of the most fundamental aspect of your species, your capacity for connection. Your bonds, your emotions, they are unlike anything we have encountered elsewhere in the galaxy. She paused, her eyes meeting his once more. Understanding these connections is vital. For both our species. Eric narrowed his eyes. Vital how? Your world is not alone, she said, her tone growing somber. There are others out there, civilizations older and more advanced than your own. Some view your kind as a threat. Others see you as an anomaly, a curiosity. My people believe you are an opportunity. Opportunity for what? Eric asked, his voice edged with suspicion. Collaboration, Liara replied. Mutual understanding. But to achieve that, we must first bridge the gap between our species. And that begins with understanding what drives you. What connects you? Eric sat back, his mind racing. The implications of her words were staggering. If what she said was true, then humanity was on the brink of something unimaginable, contact with an advanced alien race. But the way she spoke, so calm and measured, hinted at something more. Something deeper. And you think studying mating rituals is the key to all that? He asked, his tone skeptical. Liara nodded. It is the foundation of your connections. The bonds formed through intimacy shape your species in ways that extend beyond the individual. It influences your societies, your cultures. To understand it is to understand you. Eric let out a low whistle, shaking his head. This is insane. Completely insane. Perhaps, Liara said, a faint smile curving her lips, but it is also necessary. Eric leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Okay, let's say I believe you. Let's say this isn't just some bizarre fever dream. What happens now? Liara regarded him silently for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she stepped closer, her presence almost overwhelming in its intensity. That depends on you, Eric Kane. On me? He raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? You have a choice, she said softly. You can send me away. Forget this ever happened. Or, she hesitated, her luminous eyes searching his face. You can help me. Eric's heart pounded in his chest as the weight of her words sank in. He didn't know what was more terrifying, the idea of sending her away, and never knowing the truth, or the thought of what might happen if he agreed to help her. Help you how? He asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Liara stepped closer still, until she was only a foot away. Her presence was magnetic, her gaze piercing. By allowing me to observe, to learn. Eric swallowed hard, his pulse thundering in his ears. He had no idea what he was getting himself into, but one thing was certain. His life would never be the same. The room seemed smaller, the air thicker. Eric stood near the window, gazing out at the city lights that sprawled like veins of molten gold in the darkness. Liara sat cross-legged on the floor, her glowing eyes tracking his every movement with a quiet intensity. Her presence was as undeniable as the hum of energy that seemed to follow her, subtly altering the atmosphere. Eric let out a long breath, raking his fingers through his hair. You know, I can't believe I'm even considering this. Helping you, I mean. You are hesitant, Liara said gently, her voice steady yet laced with an understanding that made Eric pause. But your curiosity outweighs your fear. Eric turned to her, folding his arms across his chest. You've got me there. I guess I've always had a thing for unraveling mysteries, even if this one's out of this world. Liara tilted her head slightly, her silvery hair catching the dim light. Your willingness to explore the unknown is one of the traits that drew me to you. Great, Eric muttered, pacing the room. So I'm a lab rat with a strong sense of adventure. Not a lab rat, Liara corrected. A collaborator. The word hung in the air, its weight undeniable. Eric wasn't sure what unsettled him more. The alien herself, or how quickly he was adapting to the absurdity of the situation. So what exactly does this collaboration entail? He asked, narrowing his eyes. Because if you're expecting me to, I don't know, start doing some kind of alien mating ritual, I'm gonna have to pass. Liara's expression shifted, a fleeting flicker of amusement crossed her features. Your species' humor is unique. I'm serious, Eric said, stopping his pacing. I need specifics, Liara. No more cryptic answers. Liara rose smoothly to her feet, her movements as fluid as liquid mercury. She stood before him, her height nearly matching his. I require an immersive understanding of human connections, she said. Physical, emotional, and social. Eric raised an eyebrow. You're saying you want to experience being human? To a degree, she replied. My people's research has always been observational, distant. But we have realized that understanding your kind requires more than observation. It requires participation. The word sent a chill down Eric's spine. Participation? What does that mean? You want to live here? Go out and mingle with people? Lyra's gaze held his, unflinching. It means forming a bond. A connection. With you. Eric took a step back, his pulse racing. Hold on a second. You're talking about what? A relationship. You can't just decide something like that. Human connections don't work that way. I understand, she said softly. Your species values choice and autonomy. That is why I am asking for your consent. Her words struck a chord in him, silencing the rebuttal that had been forming on his tongue. She was asking, not demanding. And despite everything, the absurdity, the tension, there was an earnestness in her gaze that he couldn't ignore. I need to think about this, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra nodded. Take the time you need. Later that night, Eric lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling. Lyra had retreated to a corner of the room, her lithe form sitting unnaturally still, as if she required no rest. Her presence was both comforting and unnerving, a constant reminder that his life had veered into the realm of the extraordinary. What am I doing? He thought, closing his eyes. This is insane. I should call someone, scientists, the government, anyone who could handle this better than me. But another part of him, the part that had always been drawn to the unknown, whispered that this was his chance. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to uncover truths that no one else on Earth had ever encountered. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden knock at the door. Eric bolted upright, his heart pounding. He glanced at Lyra, who was already standing, her glowing eyes alert. Are you expecting someone? She asked, her voice low. No, Eric whispered, slipping out of bed. His mind raced as he moved toward the door, his steps careful and quiet. Peering through the peephole, he saw a man in a dark suit standing in the hallway. His face was shadowed, but something about his posture set Eric on edge. He held no visible badge or identification, just a calm, calculated demeanor that screamed authority. Who is it? Lyra asked, her tone sharper now. I don't know, Eric whispered, stepping back from the door. But I don't think it's anyone I want to talk to. The man knocked again, louder this time. Eric Kane, he called, his voice firm. We know you're in there. Open the door. Eric's stomach dropped. How does he know my name? Lyra's expression darkened. They've found me. Who's they? Eric hissed, panic creeping into his voice. There are factions among the galactic community, Lyra said quickly, her voice urgent. Not all are friendly. Some wish to prevent my research, to keep humanity in isolation. The man outside knocked again, the sound reverberating through the apartment. Open the door, Mr. Kane. We need to have a conversation. Eric's mind raced. What do we do? I can't just let him in. Lyra's gaze flickered toward the window. We need to leave. Now. Leave. How? We're on the 3rd floor. She stepped closer, her voice firm but calm. Trust me. Before Eric could protest, she grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the window. Her touch sent a jolt through him, like a current of energy sparking beneath his skin. With a single fluid motion, she pushed the window open and climbed onto the fire escape. Come on, she urged, her luminous eyes scanning the alley below. Eric hesitated, glancing back at the door as the man outside began to pound on it. Adrenaline surged through his veins. Without another thought, he followed Lyra onto the fire escape, the cool night air biting at his skin. As they descended, Eric's mind spun with questions. Who was the man at his door? How had they found Lyra? And more importantly, what had he just gotten himself into? For now, there were no answers, only the sound of their footsteps echoing down the metal stairs and the faint, distant wail of sirens approaching. The cold night air whipped against Eric's face as he scrambled down the fire escape after Lyra. Below them, the narrow alley was shrouded in darkness, the dim glow of a flickering street lamp their only source of light. The pounding on the apartment door above grew louder, followed by the unmistakable sound of splintering wood. They're inside, Eric hissed, his pulse racing. Keep moving, Lyra said, her voice calm but edged with urgency. She landed lightly on the asphalt below, her movements unnaturally fluid. Eric followed, his landing less graceful as he stumbled and nearly fell. What now? He asked, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Who are these guys? How did they find us? There are those who monitor Earth for anomalies, Lyra explained, her gaze darting toward the alley's entrance. My presence here has likely triggered their sensors. You're saying these guys are alien cops? Eric asked, incredulous. Not cops, Lyra said, her tone darkening, more like enforcers. Their goal is to suppress anything that could disrupt the balance of galactic order. My research falls under that category. Eric opened his mouth to respond, but a sudden shout from the alley entrance cut him off. The man from his apartment appeared, flanked by 2 others. All 3 were dressed in dark suits, their faces eerily calm, their eyes unnervingly focused. "There's no escape, Liara," the man called, his voice carrying an otherworldly resonance. "Surrender now, and this will end peacefully." Eric instinctively stepped in front of Liara, his heart pounding in his chest. "What do they want with you?" he whispered. "To erase what I've learned," she replied, her voice low, "and to ensure that humanity remains unaware of what lies beyond your world." The men began to advance, their movements measured and deliberate. Eric's mind raced. He didn't have a plan, didn't have a weapon, just a primal urge to protect the strange woman who had turned his life upside down. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice trembling but resolute. Liara placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch sending a wave of calm through him. "Eric, I won't let them harm you." Before he could respond, Liara stepped forward, her iridescent form shimmering in the dim light. The men froze, their eyes narrowing. "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice carrying an unexpected authority. "My research poses no threat to the galaxy. Humanity deserves a chance to evolve." The leader of the group sneered. "Your interference is the threat, Liara. Humanity's time will come, but it is not for you to decide when or how." Liara's expression hardened. "You underestimate them. Their capacity for connection, for growth, it is greater than you know." "Enough," the man snapped. He raised his hand, and a pulse of energy shot toward her, crackling like lightning. Eric barely had time to react before Liara moved, her form blurring as she dodged the attack. In an instant, she was beside him, her hand gripping his arm. "Hold on," she whispered. What Eric started, but his words were cut off as the world around him dissolved into a cascade of light. For a moment, he felt weightless, suspended in a kaleidoscope of colors that defied description. Then, just as suddenly, they were elsewhere. They stood in a vast, open expanse, the ground beneath their feet a smooth, glass-like surface that reflected the stars above. The air was warm, humming with an energy that seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. Eric stumbled, disoriented, and Liara caught him. "Where are we?" he asked, his voice shaky. "A safe place," Liara said. She released him and took a step back, her gaze scanning the horizon. "We don't have much time." Eric shook his head, trying to process what had just happened. "What was that?" "How did we teleportation?" she said simply. "A technology my people rarely use, but under the circumstances it was necessary." Eric stared at her. A mix of awe and disbelief etched across his face. "So what now? Do we just keep running?" "No," Liara said, her expression softening. "We need to make a choice." Eric frowned. "What choice?" She turned to him, her luminous eyes meeting his. "I can take you with me, Eric. To my world, you would be safe, and you could help me complete my research. Or I can erase your memory of all this. You'll return to your life as if tonight never happened." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. "Erase my memory," he repeated, his voice hollow. "It would protect you," she said gently. "The enforcers won't stop hunting me. If you stay, they'll target you too." Eric's mind reeled. The idea of forgetting everything, Liara, the revelations about humanity, the glimpse of something greater felt unbearable. But the alternative was equally daunting. Leaving everything behind. Venturing into the unknown with an alien woman he barely understood. What would happen to Earth? He asked finally. "If I go with you." Liara's gaze softened. "Humanity's path will continue as it always has. My people will observe, but they won't interfere. Your species has potential, Eric, great potential, but it will take time." Eric looked at her, his chest tightening. He thought about his life, the endless grind of freelance work, the loneliness that had become a constant companion. And then he thought about Liara, her strange, otherworldly beauty, her unwavering belief in humanity's worth. "I don't want to forget," he said, his voice steady. "I want to see what's out there. I want to help." Liara's expression brightened, a faint smile curving her lips. "You've made your choice." Before he could second-guess himself, she reached out and took his hand. The warmth of her touch spread through him, chasing away his fear. The glass-like ground beneath them began to glow, and the stars above seemed to shift, aligning in patterns that pulsed with energy. "Hold on," she said, her voice soft but firm. "This is only the beginning." As the light enveloped them, Eric felt a surge of excitement, fear, and hope intertwined. The last thing he saw before the world dissolved into brilliance was Liara's gaze, steady and unwavering. And then, they were gone.